Tonight on KQED Newsroom, with less than 3 weeks to go to the November elections, a look at key California congressional races and how Silicon Valley is being tested by the Saudi crisis. Plus, we'll hear from State Senator Kevin De León, the man trying to win Dianne Feinstein's seat in the Senate. And the photographer who brought us an intimate view of President Obama's White House, his visual commentaries on President Trump have made him an Instagram star. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. We begin tonight with politics. Around the state, some high-stakes congressional races are turning nasty. In San Diego County, Republican Representative Duncan Hunter's campaign has sought to portray his opponent as a Muslim terrorist. Meanwhile, in the Central Valley, Representative Devin Nunes is attacking his hometown paper, calling the Fresno Bee a left-wing rag for its examination of his business interests. Plus, the Trump administration's latest foreign policy challenges, from immigration to how the disappearance of a journalist is putting pressure on America's relationship with the Saudi government. Joining us now to discuss all these issues are Carla Marinucci, senior writer with Politico; John Myers, Sacramento bureau chief for the Los Angeles Times. He joins us via Skype. And Sean Walsh, a Republican strategist with Wilson Walsh Consulting. Welcome to you all. Let's start with the Saudi crisis. President Trump now says he believes that the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi is dead, but is not holding yet the Saudi Crown Prince responsible. Yesterday, we also saw Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, after much pressure, saying he will now pull out of the investment conference coming up. Sean, what kinds of challenges does this case present for the Trump administration?
They're huge, huge. They're our largest arms purchaser. California is actually dependent on Saudi oil coming here because we're a bit of a fuel island. The economy and the stock market could be very spooked. So right now the economy is thriving, and this is all coming right before the midterm election. It could be huge implications.
But look, this story's been going on for more than a week. Intelligence sources say today that it is inconceivable that the Saudi prince did not know what was going on in that consulate. At this point, there are ripples in California. When you have $6 billion in Saudi investments in Silicon Valley and huge pension funds and universities that also have investments here, there's going to be pressure now for people to say, do we want, does this represent what California is about, to have this investments with this government when this contention is that they dismembered a journalist for the Washington Post in a consulate? The outrage has just been, I think, worldwide.
And so where do they go from here? Because, again, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund owns stakes in companies like Uber, Tesla, billions of dollars of investment in Silicon Valley and the tech industry as a whole.
I think they have to get all their facts straight. And he's not the king, he's the crown prince. There's other folks there. So how do you take appropriate measures against the people who perpetrated it? I go a little bit slower, get all your ducks in a row, don't shoot from the hip. And then when you do it, the United States has to act for freedom, it has to act for journalistic integrity, and it has to act in its interest, but it has to act smart.
All right, let's move on to immigration.
Shooting from the hip. I was going to say shooting from the hip is what happens during election season, right? I mean, we are right before an election day, and this kind of international crisis, to Carla's point, has all these ramifications through campaigns and everywhere else. People being consistent on a message is hard to see at this time of year.
And also another issue that's been big as we approach the midterms is immigration, John. And we're also hearing a lot this week about how irate President Trump is over the caravan of migrants traveling from Honduras to our southern border. Also yesterday, we learned that National Security Advisor John Bolton and White House Chief of Staff John Kelly got into a huge argument, a loud argument over immigration. What does this say about how the Trump administration is executing its immigration policies right now? John.
Policy-wise, I think that's a tough one to answer. So certainly from my perch here, I mean, I think that there have been so many questions throughout all of these months about has the policy been consistent? Has it been communicated clearly? Does the administration have a plan in advance for when families and children have been coming to California? But the politics of this, again, I get back to what I said a moment ago. Election day is around the corner. This is a live wire, it would seem like to me, especially for Republicans running in those contested House seats in California. Every step the Trump administration makes, you are going to be tied to, I think, by your Democratic challengers. It's really fascinating.
I think, John, you're off insofar as I think this puts attention to the fact that we have failing policies at the border and we do not have border control. So I actually think this motivates Republicans to come to the polls and vote, and conservative Democrats. I think this undermines the Democrats when they talk about family separation. When you had the family separation policy change, you had 30,000 more people come to the border in 1 month. So this is a big political issue, and it's a big potential positive for Republicans.
But I think, listen, when President Trump, in the videos he's putting up, in the tweets he's putting up, pictures of these caravans have, I think we've seen this movie before in California. They keep coming. 187, we know how that played out for the Republicans in California. And I'm wondering, as much as it may energize some of the President Trump's base, will it also energize Latino voters, Democratic voters, who see this sort of same theme? President Trump is trying to play this caravan as some kind of national security threat. It's not.
And to your point, because they keep coming, I think that's why we're seeing this frustration now, right? And his tweets and how irate he is over the caravan. And there's also now much speculation about a new White House proposal to continue pursuing a family separation policy, basically offering parents now a choice. You can stay in family detention with your children as long as your immigration case proceeds. It could take years, or you allow your children to be taken to a shelter so that other guardians can seek custody. So, Carla, why is this issue coming up again now? And wasn't it settled by the courts?
I mean, this issue, it's just kind of amazing that, considering the kind of press that he got the first round on this family separation, we know how it plays with women voters, suburban women voters, particularly, who are going to be very, very influential. The immigration policy of the Trump administration right now is just kind of amazing in terms of the way it's grabbing headlines, not only on family separation, but on H-1B visas, where the idea of letting spouses of H-1B holders now no longer, and that can really affect Silicon Valley also. So on both these issues, I think the Trump administration is playing a risky game with regard to immigration policy.
That's what I was going to say. I just think it's a live wire. I mean, I think Sean made a really good point a moment ago, and it could certainly play well for Republicans. It's just a live wire. I mean, no one really knows where it's going. You're talking about a president who works without a safety net. And I think, a lot of people are going to have to watch every zig and zag out of Washington.
All right, and speaking of live wire and midterm elections, John, let's talk about some of the congressional races. You brought them up earlier. Some key congressional races are getting very nasty, especially the Duncan Hunter race. The Republican Duncan Hunter was, over the summer, indicted for campaign fraud. And as this race grows tighter, he is stepping up his attacks on his Democratic challenger, Amar Kampa-Najjar. Tell us what he's been doing.
Well, I mean, this is one of those efforts where the candidate is trying to distinguish himself from his opponent, and he's saying his opponent's too liberal. That would be the most charitable version of, I think, what Congressman Hunter has said. The less charitable version, of course, is that he's suggesting that his opponent has ties to extremist groups across the country, across the world, I should say, certainly linking back his opponent's grandfather, who was involved in things in the past in terms of the kidnapping of Olympic athletes decades ago. It's an ugly race, and what I find really interesting is that the Duncan Hunter race wasn't on the radar of battleground races in California until the indictments came down, and that's a solidly Republican district down there in Southern California, and you wouldn't think someone could lose it, but an indicted congressman in these circumstances, who knows?
And also he called him a radical Muslim, and Kampa-Najjar is Christian.
Yeah, exactly. And I think all of that raises some really fascinating questions about where the line is on campaign strategy. And to your point, Twee, accusations that it is way over the line. But Duncan Hunter's probably in the race of his life right now. I mean, certainly the best case scenario is that he wins. The worst case scenario is that actually, the best case scenario is he wins and maybe he's further prosecuted in the courts. The worst case scenario, he loses and he's prosecuted in the courts. I think he's fighting for his political life in this race. And
another contentious race, Sean, Devin Nunes, the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee. We saw him in the headlines a lot with the Russia investigation. he's now at war with his own hometown newspaper, the Fresno Bee. He's attacking it for running harsh editorials, for running investigative articles on his business interests. Is he taking a page out of President Trump's playbook?
I just think that the entire election cycle here is about as ugly as we've seen in a couple of generations. So let's take a step back. The entire California pathway forward for Nancy Pelosi to take the speakership, again, a lot of it does run through California. The Democrats were feeling very, very good about 3-4 weeks ago. Everything has narrowed. You have from Kavanaugh to Elizabeth Warren to Hillary Clinton kind of floating a trial balloon. She's going to run again. You name
That's
it.
giving adrenaline to the GOP?
To the GOP. And the Democrats have now turned it on. They have 10x fundraising advantages in all of these races. So I think that Republicans were very depressed 3 weeks ago. Now they're in a fight for their lives, and the person who makes the mistake last is probably the person who's going to lose. But Mimi Walters is in much better shape today. Even Dana Rohrabacher is looking better. I will call it out here. Duncan Hunter, even though he's indicted, is probably going to win. There's some other races that are in more trouble. But Republicans are looking a lot better today than they did 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, the fundraising advantage for the Democrats has been amazing. But Sean is right. Democrats have made some strategic mistakes in terms of the way they've brought up different issues. Elizabeth Warren being a good example. So at this point, he's right. It's all about getting out the vote, and the Democrats are energized there, but so is the Republican base at this point.
A lot going on, a lot to watch. I want to thank you all for being with us. Sean Walsh, also Carla Marinucci, and John Myers from Sacramento. Nice to have you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now a look at the Senate race. This week, California's candidates for senator sat down for their only public face-to-face conversation in this campaign season. Incumbent Senator Dianne Feinstein and her challenger, State Senator Kevin De León, discussed their differences at a forum hosted by the Public Policy Institute of California in San Francisco. Feinstein has represented California since 1992. De León says it's time for a new way of thinking in Washington. He served for 12 years in the state legislature and was president pro tem of the state Senate. He says his top priorities in Washington would be immigration reform and single-payer health care. As part of our election coverage, KQED Politics senior editor Scott Schaefer sat down with Kevin De León earlier.
Senator De León, welcome.
Thank you.
You are running against a 26-year incumbent in Dianne Feinstein, and I'm wondering, are you saying essentially to voters that she has been ineffective as a senator?
Well, let me say, Scott, that I think these are very dangerous, consequential times in our nation's history, and we're engaged in a battle for America's soul against a president without one. I would say that the status quo in Washington is either unwilling or incapable of fighting back. So I think strongly that it's time that we stop biding our time and biting our tongue while this president unravels California's progress.
When you say you're not afraid to fight back, like what do you mean by that?
Well, I think that on the issue of climate change, on the issue of ICE agents who have been pursuing mothers and fathers, betraying American children, on the issue of health care and Medicare for all, these values are not being represented in Washington, D.C. today. And that's why I want to be a new voice. I think it's time for a new approach and a new change today in California.
So Senator Feinstein is known as a centrist, center-left senator, somebody who reaches across the aisle. Where would you put yourself on the political spectrum?
Well, to me, it's not so much about being more to the left or being more to the right, but it's about actually moving forward with policies that are common sense, policies that I've accomplished here in California: 100% clean energy, sanctuary state, equal pay for women doing equal work.
Well, why not just say those are liberal policies?
I don't think they're liberal policies per se. To me, these are policies that improve the human condition for all individuals. To me, it doesn't make a difference if you voted for Trump, for Bernie Sanders, or Hillary Clinton. Elevating the minimum wage to $15 an hour, while the inaction in Washington is $7.25. That improves the economic life of all families in California.
So what makes you say, because you're telling the voters, look, don't hire her again, hire me. You know, so why would you be better at being U.S. Senator representing California than she is?
Because it's time to have someone who's going to fight for the values that we care deeply about on the issue of health care, because I strongly believe that it's not a universal right for the wealthy. That in fact, I believe in Medicare for all, not Medicare for some. On the issue with regards to climate change, which is an existential threat to our humanity and to our planet, let's put this country on a track to 100% clean energy like I did here in California.
Senator Feinstein has a lot of seniority, and our other senator, Kamala Harris, does not. If you were to win, we'd have 2 senators, freshman senators. Why would the state want to throw out all that seniority and all that experience? Because that's how the Senate works, right, is seniority.
But Scott, let me say this, that seniority means nothing if you don't use that seniority. It's just that simple. What we witnessed with Kamala Harris, as well as Cory Booker and other senators during the hearings of the Brett Kavanaugh before the Judiciary Committee, you saw them be assertive and make motions for adjournment. We didn't see that from the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. So seniority means nothing. Whether people agree or disagree with Elizabeth Warren, I will give her credit in that she elevates the positions that she cares deeply about to a national level.
One of the things that Senator Feinstein has been criticized for is holding on to the letter that Brett Kavanaugh's accuser, Christine Blasey Ford, gave her, that she hung on to it too long. What would you have done if you had been in the Senate, if that letter had gone to you?
Clearly, I would have made sure that her confidentiality, her privacy were protected. And the unfortunate part about the Judiciary Committee is they have no processes that exist to deal with the confidentiality of a citizen who comes before the Judiciary Committee to say, hey, I was sexually assaulted by this individual, but I fear for my life. I would have made sure that we could protect her anonymity, her confidentiality, her privacy, and then I would engage my colleagues on the Judiciary Committee and say, we have this before us, and turn this letter over to the FBI. It was the leadership of the other members of the Judiciary Committee, other Democrats, who insisted and implored Senator Feinstein to turn the document over to the FBI.
So there are currently just 23 women in the U.S. Senate. Dianne Feinstein is one of them. Is it really a good time to remove one of those senators from the Senate and replace her with another man? Well,
I can tell you this, is that I've always been a strong supporter of women in politics and being in positions of power to impact the human condition for all Californians, for all Americans. I've been inspired and motivated by someone like my mother and by women janitors and home care workers and nurses who have overwhelmingly endorsed my candidacy. Ultimately, this specific race is not about gender. This specific race is about values, and the values that we want represented in Washington, D.C. My campaign manager, all of my senior staff are all women in my campaign for the U.S. Senate. So ultimately, it's not about gender. It's about having the right values representing California in Washington.
You have championed immigrant rights, both legal and undocumented immigrants. You authored SB 54, which is now known as the Sanctuary State Law. And many people, Republicans in particular, are criticizing, pointing to that law and local sanctuary laws as well as a battering ram to beat up Democrats that they're running against. Does it concern you at all that that issue is being used against your fellow Democrats?
Well, this is an issue that's personal to me, obviously coming from an immigrant family, but ultimately this is about authenticity, and these are about the values that you adhere to, not political short-term gain. And this is another example of a huge contrast between me and the senior senator. Back in 2015, the senior senator floated seriously the idea in the U.S. Senate of outlawing the establishment of sanctuary cities. Had that bill passed back in 2015, when Donald Trump started attacking and undermining our laws in California and going after hardworking immigrants, I would not have been able to pass the sanctuary state bill in California.
Some Democrats are calling for the abolishment of ICE. Is that something you agree with?
Let me say this on the issue of abolishment of ICE, because I think some folks are taking it very personal. ICE has lost its way. Instead of focusing on terrorism, on drug traffickers, on human traffickers, as well as weapons traffickers, violent criminal felons, they have focus on mothers in the Mission District or in East San Jose or in Fruitvale in Oakland selling tamales or fruit. Instead of dealing with the real issue, which is normalizing the legal status of millions of hardworking Americans throughout the country, they have weaponized this police agency to terrorize young children and their mothers.
If you're successful in November, if you're elected, you go back to Washington, what's the first thing you'd like to get done?
Well, there's several things. I think the first thing, I think health care for all. I believe in Medicare for all, not Medicare for some. The existential threat of climate change. I want to put this nation on a track to 100% clean energy by introducing a national clean energy plan and immigration reform. We need to lead the rest of the country because we have the largest number of immigrants in the United States right here in California. We need to be that leading voice. Those are the three main issues that I want to move forward that can grow this economy, put people to work, and bring prosperity to all Californians and to all Americans.
State Senator Kevin De León, thanks for being here.
Scott, thank you.
One footnote, we have an interview with Senator Dianne Feinstein scheduled for next week, and we hope you'll tune in then. Moving on now to politics in pictures. As chief official White House photographer for President Obama, Pete Souza spent a lot of time with him and took a lot of pictures, roughly 2 million of them. Souza became an Instagram celebrity by documenting the White House. Lately, he's become even more famous for using his pictures to take digs at the current president, posting photos of Obama on Instagram with captions that challenge tweets, quotes, and news from President Trump. Souza has compiled those photos into a new book titled Shade, A Tale of Two Presidents. Pete Souza joins me now in the studio. Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, first off, for those who may not know it, the title of your book, Shade, plays off the phrase throwing shade. Can you explain what that means?
It's making snarky comments about an individual or individuals that maybe are not so positive.
Was that your intention when you started posting nostalgic photos of President Obama on Instagram with your own captions?
That was my intention. I just didn't know it was called throwing shade.
And why did you feel a need to do that, to put up these photos with captions that define the contrast between the Obama administration and the Trump administration?
I mean, I saw how difficult a job it is to be president and how serious President Obama took it. He respected the office of the presidency so much, and we don't see that now. And that was the reason why. I mean, if Mitt Romney or John McCain or Marco Rubio had been president, I wouldn't be doing this because I know they would have respected the office of the presidency. But now we've got a guy that lies every day, he bullies people, he's disrespecting the office. And I felt I had a voice to speak out.
And as a private citizen now, you feel like you can.
I can, absolutely.
And I want to show a picture here. One of the pictures from your book, it's from your Instagram account. It's a picture of President Obama talking with female aides. And you added a new caption that says, respect for women. Now, clearly, this photo took on new meaning for you more recently, given current events. How often does that happen when, with your photos, in that your perception of them changes over time?
Well, I think it does. You know, the interesting thing about my Instagram feed is sometimes I post something in a reaction to something he's tweeted or a news story and post it on Instagram, and people don't know what I'm referring to. And they have to go Google to find out what happened that day. You know, in the book, I make it very clear what I'm referring to, because on one page you see a Trump tweet and on the other page you see my response.
When you first took that photo, though, what was your thought then? Just another meeting?
It was just another meeting. And, you know, President Obama had a lot of women in top positions. I mean, his last 3 years, the top 3 national security aides were all women, which is extraordinary.
And now, of course, in light of the Me Too movement and current events and the current administration, that's changed for you. What was it like to follow President Obama around and attend all these trips with him?
Well, it was very hard on your personal life, but no, it was a great privilege. It was a great way to see the world. Oftentimes, President Obama would try to go and visit a cultural site when he was in a country that he hadn't been in before. Those were the best trips, when we got to do something like that. And
did you get to see another side of him that we don't?
Well, I mean, the great thing about my job, too, is I saw him in all compartments of his life. I mean, I'm in the Situation Room with him, but then I'm often with him and the girls, or, you know, him and the whole family. And so I saw all the aspects of his life. And he's not any different than we perceive, than most people perceive. He's probably funnier than people realize, and he's more disciplined than people realize. But he's not like really different, you know, behind the scenes.
And as you were photographing him, did you try to be a fly in the wall, or did you develop more of a close relationship with him, a conversational relationship?
Yeah, I had a conversational relationship with him, but, you know, my job was to be an observer, to be a recorder of visuals. And there were some days where I might not say anything to him. And then other days, you know, we might have a conversation about, you know, our family or the ball game, the latest ball game, that kind of thing.
Were there things you decided not to photograph, or perhaps were told you can't photograph?
No, I mean, I pretty much had access to everything, and every single photograph that I made, 1.9 million, every single photograph is now in the National Archives.
I find that so amazing. I mean, that's a lot of photos, right? Nearly 2 million. How do you go about finding the right picture when you want to post something? Do you have a special system of organizing your photos?
No, it's pretty much just up here.
All 2 million?
No, not all 2 million. I mean, basically, I'm choosing photos from one of the ones that we had made public while he was in office. We made, given his level of transparency, we made lots of pictures public on Flickr, Instagram, Facebook, whitehouse.gov. And so all those pictures are kind of stored in my head. So oftentimes when Trump makes a tweet, I know exactly which photo I want to post.
You were also an official White House photographer for President Reagan. What was it like working in the Reagan White House?
It was different. I mean, Reagan was in his 70s and I was in my 20s. I was not the chief photographer, so my level of access was not as good. But I did get to know President Reagan a little bit. And he, too, respected the office of the presidency. You know, politics aside, he was a decent human being. So I sort of feel I could make this case now and not be called partisan, because I've worked for both a Democrat and a Republican.
And you feel like they handled the presidency in the same way or in a similar manner, despite their policy differences?
I mean, I think President Reagan was more of a big picture guy. And you know, just because of his age, he wasn't as active. But you know, he respected the office, and you know, as much as President Obama did.
And I know this is like asking someone to name their favorite child, but do you have a favorite photo from your Obama days?
You know, there are so many. I mean, my main goal was to create the best photographic archive that had ever been done on a president. And I'll let other people choose which they think are the favorites or the most important.
Well, you created quite an incredible archive. Pete Souza, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Your new book is titled Shade, A Tale of Two Presidents. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
And that will do it for us. As always, you can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Thank you for joining us.